Hello, everybody out there in the virtual world. I'm Richard McCabe, photo curator at the Ogden Museum, and I'm taking over the Ogden Museum's Instagram account for about 30 minutes or so. And we're going to talk to the great photographer, educator, Aaron Harden, and we'll talk about his photography practice for the next 30 minutes or how long it goes. And we will, this is part of the Ogden Museum's online programming, and this is the first time we've done an Instagram Live, so be prepared for some hiccups, but that's show business. So, but anyway, I'm excited to be here, and I hope everybody's doing all right out there and staying safe and sane, and thanks for joining us. Let me give a little background on Aaron here. He started his career as a photojournalist at the Jackson Sun in Jackson, Tennessee in 2009. In 2016, he got his MFA from the Hartford Art School International Limited Residency Program. His recent accomplishments are the Magnum Photography Fine Art Award in 2016 and the Magenta Foundation Flash Forward Award in 2016. Currently, he is an assistant professor of visual communications at Union University. He lives in Jackson, Tennessee with his wife, Alice, and his daughter, Josephine. Currently, Aaron has a photograph in the Revelations Recent Photography Acquisitions exhibition at the Ogden, and he was also in the New Southern Photography exhibition at the Ogden in 2018 and 2019. And he's been a good friend of the museum. I'm really excited to talk to him. And just to start off, hey, Aaron, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's weird times for sure. It's weird days, but all things considered, doing well.
Well, I have to, I guess the most obvious question is how are you doing? And you doing all right, staying safe in this pandemic? And have you found that you were able to make any art maybe in response to this current crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I as much as I wish, I think in my early part of my career that I was a jet setter and that started out as a photojournalist. So I think in my mind it was like I was going to be traveling and doing all this, but the best work I've ever made has been in and around my house. So being locked in my house is just really like being locked in my studio, more than anything else. Um, I I don't necessarily think that I'm making work in response to the epidemic as much as um, taking a step back and looking at what's around me that was already there before, but I think like it has given me a space to really slow down and appreciate these little tiny vignettes, these little moments.
Hmm.
And there's the one benefit about being home. I mean, I'm teaching from home full time right now until our classes are called back together. Is that I have a lot of um, time to percolate, and to go just run outside and shoot photos or make something, create something, work on a video, record a song. So I think for me, it's been more of like being oh because I'm here, I have access to so many tools at my disposal. So it's coming out in a lot of different ways, I think, but not necessarily like specifically thematically pandemic oriented, I guess.
Hmm. Well, your practice, I mean, it's so close to home anyway. I mean, it's just, your art and your life intersects so much to begin with. And, what I've found is I kind of reevaluate photographs now based on, this experience. And I'm actually looking at your work and how, there's such a metaphorical quality about the work and a biblical quality about it. And I'm starting to see things that run within our situation now, in the 13th Spring series that you did that was in the New Southern Photography exhibitions, ideas with the plague, the circadian miracle birth, the snake, Garden of Eden, and such. So there's just such a parallel with your life and your art to begin with. So um,
I mean, I I think that, and because of my background, I didn't like grow up necessarily in the church. That was kind of something that came like in high school for me, like a spiritual reality in life. But I think I've always felt like an outlier in that world in some
Hmm.
way, and more of like seeing that the way I interpret um, those narratives and things, these very spiritual aspects, I think are a lot earthier. Like I tend to just see that there's not a separation between the earth and how we participate in our life on the world, in the world, and our responsibility to the earth and nature. That I think that it goes hand in hand with us, like spirituality and like my personal spiritual beliefs too, and also that like you know it's funny how we think that we're so special because we're so modern and we have all this technology, and then something
Hmm.
comes along
Right.
that we can't control and we can't stop, and it just like washes over the whole world like like a wave, like a tsunami. And
Uh-huh.
I can't not think about how for my own personal belief system, how like I believe that there's so much that we don't understand about the world, and that our idea of control is more of a comfort to our own selves, but not necessarily the reality sometimes, that there's so much out of our hands. And I would rather take a step back and look at maybe the narrative of life rather than, that this is all coming to an end, that there's a narrative playing out. And that gives me some hope of maybe something good can happen in horrible
Hmm.
times. And, we have seen that. People doing really amazing things for each other in this time and caring for each other, and communities coming together. And I would choose to hope that some good can come out of this time, even though some horrible things are also plagues are plagues regardless.
Right, right. Well, how does your photojournalism background, you worked for the Jackson Sun as a photographer. How's that background influence your fine art practice?
Yeah, I mean, I know you and I have kind of spoken about this more in private here and there, but I can't escape kind of that documentary approach to like life, and that like I think the most interesting art is the thing, is in a photographic way, we're kind of like at the mercy of the world around us a lot of times. And I draw so much inspiration from the things that just play out in front of me as an observer, and so the
Mm.
documentary, the part of me that wants to record the things around me is there, but I think not in the same way as it was when I was a photojournalist. Like the idea of I'm
Right.
gonna like change the world or shed some truth on life. I think my practice is always documentary in the way that the images are acquired. I guess I work in a documentary mode, but
Hmm.
not. I don't have any illusions that there's any actual documentary. I feel like I'm more documenting the feeling and the spirit of a time, more so than like the facts, whatever the facts may be. And so that does come across in the way that I make pictures, and in the way that, like I'm hitting the streets like a photojournalist, but I'm not looking for those narratives. They're just
Right.
not as uh, important to me. I like the idea that reality actually there's a certain veil. If you can somehow see through the veil of reality, sometimes you can see these more interesting narratives taking place, these bigger stories taking place that are always in front of us. But like I tell my students, it's like there's interesting things happening around you all the time. You just have to be aware. Like you have to
Hmm.
see. You have to, the things are happening. You just have to be a seer. And
Hmm.
that takes a lot of work to be a seer, to be an observer, to appreciate life around us. But I can't escape it. That photojournalist in me is hard to get rid of. It's kind of goes hand in hand with my practice.
Well, I mean, one thing I think's interesting is that, and in the New Stuff in Photography exhibition, there was probably five photographers that kind of fit the documentary style, as Walker Evans would say. But what I loved about their work, and I'm thinking Kel Alfred, yourself, maybe Alex Grabick, y'all all had such a fine art aesthetic. I mean, it's not you could tell that you had a background in the arts to where it's not just to document it. the composition, the lighting is such to where it becomes very artful in its presentation, and it's capturing the moment, as opposed to just a facsimile of a fact or whatever, like you would do for the newspaper. So there's a control and there's a craftsmanship, there's a control over the medium that, you know, you have and some of the other photographers that I really, you know, thought were wonderful in doing that. And then, of course, what we're speaking about, the 13th Spring and that body of work. I wanted to talk about, kind of in the same vein of what we're going through now and telecommuting and working from home and all that. I'm really interested in where you went to school, the Hartford Art School, the International Limited Residency Program. I remember seeing them advertised in the back of Art Forum, I think, or Art in America. And I always thought, you know, the faculty they had was really great. I know Alex Soth teaches there, and Lisa Carezzi.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but it's just, it fascinated me because you don't have to be there on campus, that you can live wherever you live in America and the world, and yet go to school and get an MFA in the schools out of Connecticut. So I just think about that in the context of now, where I think you're teaching from home. So would you mind talking about your experience at Hartford?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like just before that, I was working as a freelancer. My background was a newspaper guy. And I think that like there was something, I was missing a large philosophical component to my work. And like, I was hungry to learn more, and I was really, really hungry and to like grow my craft. Like I didn't want a degree just to have a degree. And I didn't even want to go to grad school. Like I was like, I was 30 when I started there, or I was, almost 30. And so I had a friend that was in grad school, and she was like, maybe you should look at, going to grad school to get like just a greater understanding about your craft. And so I like did a bunch of research, and when I found that program, I'd never heard of it before. I thought, maybe I should try Yale, or I should try some of these like big, like huge name schools. But I was looking at the people that were coming out of the programs, and Hartford, just like every year, they were cranking out just amazing photographers that I think were socially conscious, but not to the detriment of their art. Like they had a beautiful melding of, I think, artistic integrity and also social integrity. And that was just right up my alley. That's what I wanted. That's the type of work that I wanted to do. And I only applied to that school. That was the only place I wanted to go. And I just said to myself, like if I get in, then I'll go to grad school. And if I don't get in, then I won't go to grad school. So that's the only place I wanted to go. Unfortunately, I got in. I don't know how I got in, because I was kind of underqualified. But I got in, and it's one of those things that I know there's other schools that are doing the limited residency thing, but it's such a unique thing. And it was, especially in the first days, because nobody holds your hand. Nobody's going to walk you through it. They give you, I remember like in the summer before school even started, they give you a whole list of books, and they said, you need to know everything in all of these books, this huge stack of books before day one, because you got to, we're not going to waste our time on that. We're going to get down to business. And it was all business. They worked us to death. It was like boot camp. But it was about making work. And the great thing about being not like locked into a studio with a dozen other artists is that we were all of us were practicing our crafts where we were across the world. So you had a great diversity of perspectives that were coming to the room. And because Hartford is not really a building, we would meet at Hartford at the art school once a year, but 2 or 3 other times in the year, we were traveling across the world, meeting in other locations for 2 weeks to do critiques. And we were doing, on-site visits with artists. I remember going to On-My Lee's studio in New York and sitting down and going through her contact prints of like years and years of her work. And she's sitting there, like drinking a glass of water, talking about her work. I'm like, when does this happen? When do you get to do something like this, So for somebody, I feel like I'm a huge fan of the craft. It's not an academic thing for me. Like I genuinely love photographers and photography, so in that way, it was a buffet, but it was a hard thing because there's not, you have to be a go-getter to survive that program. Like you have to be proactive, because you don't have somebody breathing down your neck. If you don't produce the work, if you don't excel, then you're going to get cut.
Right.
And it was the best thing for me. Like it was the best experience for me. But in the same, now as a teacher and like teaching remotely, I see that, like there has to be a different kind of buy-in. Like my students, they have to want this more because I'm not there to be accountable like to them all the time. Like when you go into a room, that accountability is set. But if you're in your house, thousands of miles away, that accountability is not there anymore. And that's one struggle, I think, as a teacher working remotely now, is that like I can't make you want this, right? Like, and photography, I think, is a craft of love. Like, you have to love it if you're going to do it. Like,
Right.
to really move forward in this world, you have to really love it to a level that it's illogical, right? Like,
Right.
nobody in their right mind, does this as a career move to make lots of money and to be successful. So but I think that's kind of like you have to do that. And so if you're in a remote environment like now, if you really want it, it can work fine. But that's kind of the struggle and the rub I feel with my students is like, how do I really push them in this way? So I think for me and where I was in life and what my goals were, and working remotely like in Hartford was perfect. And I got to make work in a place that nobody, I mean, I would hazard to guess you're probably the second person that's made pictures in Jackson, Tennessee that anybody has actually seen. It's just not a place that people, yeah, you have, because you shot some when you drove through,
Oh,
Didn't they make it Landstar? A couple of
Yeah.
Jackson pictures? So
Yeah.
you're the second Jackson photographer.
That's a gold mine.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I realized. It's like this place, nobody makes work here, and so it's
Right.
like I have my own canvas, and I think that's the benefit of a program like that. If you see your world and your space as a canvas, if you live in Timbuktu, if you live in Nowheresville, you have a canvas that nobody's painting on. So it can be a great gift, but you really have to see that as an opportunity and not an obstacle.
Right. To kind of piggyback on that, I know one of the couple of the tenets for the photography program at Hartford was, the documentary tradition. The other was bookmaking. Kind of end project would be a book. And I know that I wanted to talk about two books. One was a self-published book you did last year called One Tire Fire. And then another one is, and I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but I know you're going to have a book hopefully published this fall by Fall Line Press of the 13th Spring. So maybe if you want to talk about One Tire Fire and self-publishing a book and maybe your idea with that project, as opposed to working with a publisher who's going to publish a major book of the 13th Spring.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't, in my mind, I don't photograph for like a gallery context. Like I don't have the wall in mind. I always have the book in mind. Like that's always like my goal. And I think going to Hartford really illuminated that desire. Like I had experimented with like making books and stuff before I went to Hartford, but it really drove that desire home. And that's a huge component of Hartford. And I learned a tremendous amount about bookmaking and sequencing and editing. And so, I love the whole process. Of course, making the pictures, but also like I spend a lot of time working on my edits. And I spend a lot of time, like sequencing. Like I love sequencing images and what that can do narratively, because each picture is such a limited. I tell my students, like, pictures are really terrible at communicating information. That's not something that pictures do great, but it's the ambiguity of images that gives them power. And so when you have a series of, of ambiguous clumps of words, almost like, you can make a really beautiful poem. And so, the photo book for me is definitely a form that I really, really love. And even I just as a bonus, like me and my daughter made this little photo book in quarantine out of, like it's just like stab stitched, and I had her draw on the cover, and it's called The Iris, and it's printed on vellum. and it's just, you know, a series
Oh,
of
cool.
pictures that we made in one afternoon while she was picking irises, you know, running around the yard, that I just printed on a home printer. You know, it's
Oh,
it's
great.
just a little, you know, little book. And I think that that's a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to make a book. So the One Tire Fire book, which it's going to be in reverse, so just take my word for it. I printed it appropriately. Um, I just printed this at the university that I work at. You know, it's just a saddle staple, just like a magazine, which I love working with, making books that way because they lay flat. So this past summer, one of my hobbies is working on automobiles, like old automobiles.
Mhm.
And I have an old pickup truck that I've done a lot of work on. And
Oh, cool.
every other year or so, I go on a road trip with Hot Rod Magazine puts on this big road trip where thousands of old hot rods drive, you know, a couple thousand miles across America. And so my goal was, because I love doing big projects, you know, the big magnum opus. But I was like, you know, I just want to like, I just want to like make, I want to make pictures for 7 days, the 7 days that I'm driving across America in my old pickup truck. And then I'm going to edit for 7 days and sequence for 7 days. And then the following 7 days, I'm going to have a printed book. So within 21 days, I'm going to go from nothing to final book as a goal. And so, you know, so I just made this little zine from that experience. And the way that I photographed it was very different than how I normally work. Uh, Lately, in the last couple of years, I've been working in different formats rather than just, I did 6x7 color for most of the 13th spring, but this was just like 35 millimeter point and shoot, you know, wide angle lens, some fill flash, you know, it's a lot more humorous than a lot of my other work, and punchy colors. And, you know, this kind of stuff is a lot of fun. And I think that a lot of artists don't allow themselves enough time to play, you know? And
Right.
I was like, I mean, I love this world, you know, this is probably one of my favorite pictures from the book. You know,
Yeah.
like, I love the aesthetic value of old automobiles, you know, as moving sculptures, you know? And so I was like, well, why don't I just make a book about it, you know? Like, and if nobody buys it, then who
Mhm.
cares? Like, I just made it myself. And so, you know, I'm a control freak. So doing stuff like this is good. You know, I like that. I like having a lot of control, as opposed to like publishing with like a large publisher, which this is going to be my first book that I've published, the one with Fall Line Press, which is the 13th Spring, which is the work that you're very familiar with. But before I even like emailed them to like ask if they'd be interested in the work, like I'd already made some artist edition books from this, you know, from this body of
Oh,
work.
right.
And the final book is not going to be like this. The edit is really similar, but for me, like, you know, this is the image that is on display right now, the snake.
Right.
Um, for me, the editing, like I can't tell if an edit or a sequence works until I have, you know, a final book in hand. And I think that was different for Bill, and for everybody at Fall Line. I think they're more accustomed to people coming in with a, you know, a huge catalog of images with thousands of images, and like them kind of winnowing down and editing and working really intently sequencing. And Bill, you know, was told me, he was like, this is kind of strange for someone to come in and they have, you know, it's like 90% done. As for the
Hmm.
sequence, like I'm not a designer, and some of these things, that's not my gifting. Basically, where the sequencing ends, past that is where, you know, I struggle a lot. So in that way, it's great to like work with a designer that does beautiful work, and they've already brought, like, the cover that we're going to use is you know, something I never would have thought of, or at least like the color that we're using and things like that, like just things I never would have thought of. But um, it's been a big transition because I've had to force myself to let go. And, you know, like I want the work to be as best as it can be, because like I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to publish that work as a book again. You know, this might be the only time.
Hmm.
And you know, I want it to be as good as it can be, and that's why I chose Fall Line too, because I mean I have many of their books. Like Cale Alford has done a book with
Yeah.
them, and
Yeah, Carl
and
Martin.
Carl Martin, and both of those books are fantastic.
Yeah, great.
Uh,
For all new Southern photographers, Debbie Fleming Cafferty, who's now on the Revelation show, and Clay Jordan, another great one they did. But I really love their aesthetic, and they do a great job of spending time with the artist, which I think is very important. There's almost too many books out there, and a lot of things don't need to be books. And what I love about them, they really take their time and make a quality product, and they only do one at a time, so it's not, they're not pumping them out, so they really spend time with them. But I love the DIY aspect of the One Tire Fire, and that is available through your website.
yeah, I still have several copies of that. Yeah, you can just get on my website. If you want a copy, I'll drop it in the mail. I mean, you have to pay me for it, of course, but
Cool. Yeah, you gave me one. So, well, I wanted to ask you this question. You brought your class to the Ogden now. I think y'all have come on about 3 field trips to the Ogden. I just wanted to know what the Ogden Museum means to you, and that's it. I just wonder if it's a resource, just what your thoughts of the museum.
yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to be really biased because, and I owe so much to you, especially because, if there's anything that I would brag, especially in the photo realm of the Ogden, is like, having a curator like you, that you watch and look for work that, that is even from people like me that no one's heard of. And I think that's such a unique thing, that you can see work at the Ogden that you might not see at other institutions. That is, ideal. It is fantastic. And, the Ogden was on my radar when you reached out to me about being a part of New Southern Photography. And I remember, I can't remember if it was an email or a call, but I was just like, this has got to be a joke. Like, this can't be for real. And then when I found out that it was, I was really, really beside myself. That's definitely one of my crowning achievements, is being a part of in that roster of New Southern Photography. I mean, if you just look at that was your baby, and which I would love to hear more from you, even just as the curator, about that show. So that's kind of how I got to know the Ogden initially, was as an artist. But then after being there and participating, and after conversations with you, and knowing kind of, I've met several curators, but having a curatorial staff that is down to earth, that explains what they're doing to the people that are like the viewers, that, I feel like there's not as much of this wall at the Ogden, that like it's an open place where you can actually learn and experience things. And when I brought a set of students down before the New Southern Photography show, before I showed in that, and I remember you bringing out, I think, some Walker Evans prints or something from Hale County, and you had some Christenberries up at that point too in that exhibition. I think it was the South in Color. Was that the exhibition before? And I remember like standing in this room with my students, this little gaggle of students. And you have like Walker Evans and just that you just brought out of the back for everyone to see, And I was like, where does this happen? Like when can this happen? And that started my affection for Christenberry, was that like seeing that show and the connection to Hale County, work in Hale County. And so, of course, whenever the Christenberry show was coming up, I was like, I have to bring students to see the Christenberry show. And that show by far is one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the work that you all put into that show, and taking such a complex artist and like breaking down movements of his life, whether it's painting or sculpture, or of course photography. That show, I wanted my students to see it. I had to have them see that. So I mean, I think from Jackson to New Orleans is 6 or 8 hour, it's a fair clip, to go down. So we went over one of the fall breaks to come down to see the Christenberry show, and just being able to walk through with you and with my students, so that they can understand, have a greater understanding and appreciation of an artist like Christenberry was, I mean, what a rich gift, again, like I don't think there's any replacement for that, when you can really see the work
Right.
firsthand. You can see the print, you can see the sculptures. They're right there and seeing them all in context. And that Christenberry show was like really impactful to me, like in my own personal practice too. I mean, I went home after that show, after seeing some of his Polaroids or his little instant pictures, and especially the cross with the egg crate cross. I mean, that
Hmm.
for some reason that image just really had an
Right.
effect on me, and I started shooting, like instant pictures
Hmm.
because of that experience. It was like so moving to see Kristen Berry's work. And that, I know that you're a huge Kristen Berry fan, and to have, you there to take us through, even from like Walker Evans to Kristen Berry
Hmm.
to where we are now. And it's,
Hmm.
for me as an outsider, and I don't think a lot of people that go to the Ogden realize this, but like the work that you do, I think you can see a lineage, a certain lineage, to from, Walker Evans to Kristen Berry to the work that you do, which has also been really impactful to me to see, the instant pictures and stuff. And I don't know, can we take an aside? Can we talk about some of the work that you've done in the instant? I would like to sit in the instant
Sure.
photography world for a bit
Sure.
if we can.
I want to say about those Christenberries, it was so great because he was one of my heroes, obviously, and one of the greatest artists, I think, of the 20th century. And when we did that show, the family just basically let us go in the studio and just said, see you in 4 hours. You guys do whatever you want. And so we were basically going, Bradley Summerall and I, the curator collections, going through flat files, just looking through stuff. And I came across those Polaroids and I pulled them out. I couldn't believe it. They're SX70s. And I told Kate, who's kind of the studio manager, his daughter, I was like, Kate, can I show these Polaroids? And she's like, sure. And those have never been shown before. And even the Ogden's original director, Rick Gruber, who's one of the premier scholars on Christenberry and has written 3 books on Christenberry, had never seen those Polaroids before. So that was the first time they were ever shown. And I was really happy about that. That was kind of an epiphany to see those. And, but yeah, as you know, I love instant film. And but Eggleston just had a Polaroid book come out. So I think Christenberry needs one now.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
anyway, but what did you want to say?
Well, I mean, I just, like I think we'd be remiss, at least in my own personal journey. I feel like the Ogden and you as the curator there have had an impact even on my own practice, not just as I mean, definitely as an educator and bringing my students to have access, but also like, I think, like sometimes patrons forget that sometimes their curatorial staff are accomplished artists too. And I don't know, I would just like to hear, like a
Oh,
little bit about how like your world in instant photography. I'm still really
right.
new to instant photography, and you've been doing it for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I love it, and I came into it. It's weird because when I graduated from college in 2000, no, excuse me, 1998, and from Florida State, my professor said, "Well, you got to go to New York. That's where you go to make it." Um, and so I went to New York, and I didn't have any money, didn't have any. That's when digital was just coming in. Didn't have a digital camera. I had a 35 millimeter, but I was a darkroom person, so I didn't have a darkroom. But I did have 2 Polaroid cameras that I bought at the T&W flea market in Pensacola for $10. And so I was able to make art with those cameras, and not have a studio. And so that's why I fell in love with it, that and the idea of just making do with what you have and the materials you have. So I made for about 3 years, that's all I shot with, was an SX70 and a Polaroid land camera. And I just loved it, and you were able to make art in the most simplest of means. And also I love the scale,
Yeah,
everything in
totally.
photography now is big, and, there's that intimacy, there's the object to, the small object, the preciousness of the object, which I think is really interesting. And I always thought Polaroids got a bad rap, that they were kind of like the thumbnail sketch to the oil painting, which was the,
Hmm.
gelatin silver print. whatever. But anyway, but I curated a show at the Ogden about 5 years ago called Instant Processing, Self-Processing Instant Photography, which a lot of people really enjoyed. So it's just something that I've always been interested in. And then of course I did my own body of work, the Landstar. For about 4 years I shot just with a Polaroid land camera, but now you can't get the film anymore. So
Yeah.
I stopped doing it. I'm kind of glad. Forced me back into the Hasselblad. But so I want to see, that kind of leads to the next thing. You've been making these cameras that I think are really cool, these Frankenstein cameras.
Yeah.
Perfecting. Do you mind talking about these cameras you've been working on?
So I come from a long line of tinkerers. Like my granddad had like so many patents. He like hand built his own gyrocopter, and this is like in the middle of a rice field in like rural Arkansas. None of my people went to college, so I mean, this guy like built his own thing and then learned how to fly it. So I come from a long line of tinkering folks. So the format that I've been working in is like the Instax Square, so it's like like a Polaroid but a lot smaller, and of course the film is a lot more affordable, which is a big concern for me. But they don't make a manual version. Like I want a camera that I can have some control over, like a Polaroid land, like 180 or 195 or something. I wish they'd made something like that for the Instax Square. I would be like in hog heaven, but unfortunately they don't. So and I've been being in quarantine. I've been around the house, and my little brain has been spinning. So I had this old TLR that a friend gave me. It was like under a bed somewhere. As every photographer has way too many old cameras that someone gave them, like it's just an inevitability. It's World War II era, 1930s, 1940s, really simple camera. And I thought, like how awesome would it be to have like a TLR that shot Instax Square? And so Lomo makes a Diana instant camera that it's a real simple contraption. I just needed something to process the film. And so I literally I found one on sale, ordered it. Within having it at my house in an hour, I had already taken it totally apart, try to see how it worked, like how does this actually process it? And I proceeded to like take the lens mount off of it and then cut into the body. And I also cut into this camera so that I could actually put the film, in there. And I wired up a little, processing where I can, after I take the picture with the front camera, hit the little button and it'll, spit out process the film. So that's been a little work in progress. It's been really problematic, and it's a lot of burning through film, which I hate doing, just to make it work. I'm actually 3D modeling a 3D printable camera right now. So it's like, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well go like whole hog and actually make a TLR. So I'm working on making a 3D printable TLR that uses like the Mamiya C330 lenses, possibly. Either that, or I'm going to make a back that goes onto like a Polaroid land camera, because I really like the land cameras. That's one thing that I've put together. I also, I would show you the rig, but I'm using components of it right now for this live stream. But I also figured out my zoom camera. I call it the first person zoomer. So, teaching photography from your spare bedroom is really challenging. Like I like being out in the field and being hands-on and, showing students how things work. And so I was laying in bed the other night and I was just like, man, I just wish that there was some way that I could make my teaching better, because I just feel I'm the best when I'm in the classroom. Like all the rest of the parts of teaching are a challenge for me, but like being in the classroom is my favorite part. So I thought, what if I figure out a way to because we do Zoom meetings for class. If I figure out a way to get my cell phone attached to my camera and looking through the viewfinder, and then I'll just go on Zoom with my camera and walk around the neighborhood while I'm on Zoom live with my cell phone. And so, like, this is my big Pentax normal camera, but it has like a little tripod hole on the side. And I used a magic arm, which is actually holding up my cell phone right now. and I like attached it to here, and it would come out and come back around, and my camera on my cell phone would look through my viewfinder so that my students could actually see through the lens of my camera. And then I would look on my cell phone to see what my composition was. But I was teaching kids about composition by them looking through the viewfinder of my camera and seeing, like, this is how I compose like a certain picture. And we just walked around the neighborhood. The one thing I didn't take into account is like this camera especially is super heavy, and I was holding it out like this because I had to like the cell phone, and my arms were burning after 30 minutes of that. But I don't know, like, it's just the way my brain, I love that, like when you're talking about like moving to New York and you just make with what you have.
Right.
I feel like that's been almost the entirety of my career. Like I've never had funding for anything, like I've been able to somehow piecemeal together equipment or make things work, and, use enough gaffer's tape to make something work. And, I think limitation is good for a creative person, like it causes you to figure out things that, that you wouldn't have to, and come up with new solutions. And when else are my students going to be able to see through the viewfinder to see how, like, this is literally how I compose a picture. Like, here you go. Here's deep into my practice,
Right.
So I sometimes I wonder if I create problems to solve just for my mental health. That might be part of it as well. It makes me feel a lot better when I'm solving problems. So sometimes I just create problems to solve.
Well, I can't see on this thing like how long we've gone.
I think we're good for another probably like 10 or 15, I think.
Okay. Does anybody out there in the audience have any questions? Sorry, my lighting is so bad, man. It was good, and then as soon as you turn this on, like I want to get over there
and the cell phone cameras are kind of weird too. Sometimes they overexpose and stuff. I'm scrubbing through here. I don't see any questions so far. We've got some waves. We got some Hey Richards.
Okay, I can't even see who's on there. But do you have any questions for me?
I did want to hear about, especially like when you are putting together a show. I don't know. It's hard to pick one because there's so many good shows that I've seen there. I haven't seen Revelations yet, so it's like really hard to think about that. But I would imagine that a show like Revelations is kind of like New Southern Photography, and it may be even more challenging.
It's hard.
You have work from over 100 years,
right?
And of different. How do you even start to put together a show like that?
There's two ways to do it. One, you could go chronologically, because it starts from Revelations starts from 1910 to 2020. So, but I just find relationships to where photographs speak to each other, whether it's landscapes or processes or scale or, so that's basically it. It is hard, So in that show, there's 70 photographs by 45 photographers. And so the thing about New Southern Photography, which was great, I mean, one of the things I really want to do is show a body of work from every photographer. So, I mean, there's nothing worse than group shows where, there's 100 photographers, each one of them has one piece in the show, and all the work is screaming at each other. So you try to make connections, subject matter, process, time periods, so things like that. But yeah, that was, but we had so many great pieces come into the collection in the last 10 years. So basically, Revelations is a show that's kind of the pieces that have come in the collection since I've been curator of photography. So it was time to do it. It's been about 10 years. And we do 3 shows a year, usually. The next big show is going to be Ramel Ross in 2021, who was in New Southern Photography and who's photographed in Hale County and did the film Hale County this evening, that he was nominated for an Academy Award.
Yeah,
shows on PBS.
That film is so amazing.
Yeah, it was and it was on PBS World for 3 times yesterday. But yeah, he's great, and he's making new work. And so yeah, it's just trying to balance the programming between like you said, emerging artists with New Southern photography is something I'm really interested in. I think some of the best work being made in the South and in the world is by emerging or underrepresented photographers. It's not the, no offense to the to the Sally Manns of the world or the William Egglestons, but and Sally's one of the best for sure. But I think you guys are making some of the best work. And the other great thing about it, you guys are cheap. It's like it doesn't cost much to put you in a show, and it's just trying to get it's a way to give back a little bit because you need the experience. You guys need the experience. You guys are just coming up. You need the shows, and the work, like I said, is great. I went to Paris Photo last year. The Ogden sent me there. I was so grateful for them to do it, and I swear I thought, if we had a booth at Paris Photo of New Southern photography, we would have blown that place away because the work was just so strong, and the work that's being made in the South right now is so strong. I don't know why it is what it is, the Southern tradition. It's disproportionately strong in photography. It's always been in our history. So it's just something that's I'm very interested in. And anyway, that show is labor of love. But it's just, I kind of try to base it on work that I don't think people, I don't try to do what I think people want to see. I try to do what people need to see. And so anyway, that's my spiel. And my boss is really great. He kind of lets me do whatever I want. So it's nice that way. So I try to show like a blue chip photographer maybe once a year, then with maybe a thematic show with another show of emerging artists, just kind of break it up that way. So,
Yeah, I mean it's such a special like place that you can kind of play or not play, but I mean like that you get the freedom to do some stuff that I think is like really impactful. It's not pandering, it's not just pandering to something that has a preconception about what a space or what a show has to be in a Southern context. And the South gets there. It's funny whenever the few times that I'm in New York or whatever, like showing work, which is very, very, very few. I was really fortunate to get into the New York Portfolio Review several years ago, and it was real. It's always fun to like show people work from the South, and they're like, "Where is this and what is this?" Because a lot of people have preconceptions about what it looks like, and the type of work that what is Southern work, and it's like. How could anybody say that? How could you, like pigeonhole such a vast array of perspectives? And so, I mean, that's one thing I love about the Ogden having you there is like, I feel like you do get a good breadth of perspectives of the South,
Well, I appreciate it. And somebody asked a question. I kind of quasi answered it about Ramel Ross coming in the future. And, there's a couple kind of thematic shows I've been trying to do. One thing, we try to introduce more video. We started with this moving picture series, and Courtney Egan was last year a video artist from New Orleans. I'm looking to work with some other video artists in the next few years. Dave Grieber was one that we were working with. Unfortunately, because of this pandemic, a lot of the exhibitions have been postponed, because of different reasons. Mainly, finances and just the exhibition schedule. Basically, every institution has postponed 2020. Basically, 2020 has been postponed to 2021 for everything, whether it's football, art, so.
The two big ones, football and art.
Yeah, football. Yeah, I'm really worried about that one. But yeah, so there was another series I want to do kind of based on states and, focusing on different states, and Arkansas was one that I was looking at some photographers there because it's kind of a state for some reason we kind of ignore. We've been ignoring, and I really want to reach out to states and show kind of like New Southern photography, but a smaller version, maybe 3 to 5 photographers from a state. Start with Arkansas. And so I was talking to some photographers there, Zora Mirth and Rebecca Doran, who's really great. And then of course that got postponed. And then I think we might be doing a project with Mike Brody, who did a year of juvenile prosperity, um, or a period of juvenile prosperity. He's from Pensacola, Florida, where I actually grew up, and I think we might be collaborating with Pensacola Museum to show a new body of work of his, and then maybe some of the older work, and that's coming up. I want to do a meat yard show,
Yeah. Oh man,
which
that would be cool.
that was in the pipeline, but that one's probably going to get postponed too. And so, he'd be like the blue chip photographer who, usually the blue chip shows we like to show around Photo NOLA because that's when the
Hmm.
photo world comes to New Orleans. And so, that one was for, I think, 2021, but that's Ramel Ross is going to be in that slot now. But anyway, so that's kind of have free reign there and trying to expand the parameters of what is, you know, photography, the mission, integrating video, lens formed imagery, installation art. So yeah, trying to break down some barriers and the parameters. And so yeah, any other questions? I'm just going to go until they shut us off. I
Yeah,
don't
why
think
not?
anybody's listening anymore, but I don't care. So this is fun. Get to
It's
hear ourselves
Friday. Everybody's getting off
talk.
of
Yeah,
getting wrapping up their work. This is how it
yeah, because
should
that
be. Just
this,
hanging out on the
yeah,
porch.
right, exactly. So if this pandemic hadn't happened, that'd be about 20,000 people in my front yard because I live in the in the fairgrounds area of New Orleans. So Jazz Fest is like right out my front door. So um, this is pretty. Somebody just
Pretty
said, please
quiet.
keep it up. Okay, cool. All right, I'll keep it going. So, uh, but anyway, yeah. Anybody else have any questions out there?
Yeah, don't be shy now. Trying to think of anything I think we covered most of the stuff. Uh, I'm interested to see some more of these Hasselblad pictures that you're working on.
Yeah,
You still
I
traveling
mean,
around like for your new work?
not so much. I'm going to I'm trying to work on a new body of work. And, one thing I fell in love with again in Paris photo was black and white photography. Not that I never fell out
Really?
of love with it, but everything now is so big and in color. So everything's kind of looking the same. And man, I tell you, I was gravitated towards those Man Rays from the 30s and the Walker Evans and, everything up to the 70s was just like, unbelievable. It was so refreshing, and the black and white, the glory of black and white photography. Not that I never fell in love out of it with. So I started shooting black and white again. I went out and bought a bunch of
Ah,
black and white film, and I missed my dark room. Somebody just asked a question: how do you research new artists for the Ogden? That's a great question, and that's how I found out about Aaron. Basically, I do portfolio reviews. Um, uh, Photo NOLA every year. I'm always looking, follow a bunch of different websites, Lens Scratch. I forget, Aaron, it might have been Lens Scratch that I saw, and I think it was the Magnum Prize where that's how I found out about you, is a story on the Magnum Prize, and it was an image of your snake. So, I mean, I'm always looking. I try to go to galleries as much as I can. I don't get up to New York that much, but we accept submissions at the Ogden Museum. There's a place on our website where you can go to submit work. So I look at submitted work. We review it in the curatorial meetings about once every 6 months, but mainly through portfolio reviews and just keeping my eye open on the web, Instagram, you know, I see a lot of great stuff on that. So I usually kind of search people out, I usually find them. They don't find me is the way it usually works. So word of mouth, I love when people tell me, oh, you need to see this person, you need to see his work. Um, New Southern Photography was great that way. That's how I found out about you, Carl Martin, some of the people that were really, fell in love with through that process. And I was reviewing at Photo Lucida in Portland, and I reviewed David Emmett Adams' work there, and I just fell in love with that. It blew me away. And David was a photographer out in Arizona, and a lot of his pictures were made in California. And I was like, David, we got to make you a Southern photographer. And so he came and did a body of work in the South. You know, he drove his truck. You know, he does big tintypes and he processes it on the spot. So he actually made this body of work in the South, and I showed it in New Southern Photography. And actually, Roger Ogden bought a couple pieces for the Ogden collection that are now shown in the Revelations exhibition. So, you know, it's either about the South, you're either a photographer from the South, or your work is about the South. So, you know, we can have somebody from Tokyo come to Memphis and make a body of work, and that's, you know, fits our mission. But I love the Ogden mission. I came to the Ogden first time in 2004 when I was living in New York. I took a friend to the New Orleans airport, and I came and checked out the Ogden, and they actually had a Eggleston exhibition up at the time where the curator at the time, David Houston, had kind of recreated the guide show that Eggleston had at MoMA in '76. And I saw that show, and I said to myself, and I was living in New York at this time, and I was like, you know what, I want to work at this place, just because I think the mission of the Ogden is so great. You know, showing work from the American South, and we're the only museum in the world dedicated to showing art from the American South. So I just think our mission is very crucial and important. And for a while there, I thought that would be kind of limiting as a curator, like, oh my gosh, you know, our mission is so narrowly defined, but it's not. You can really explore, you know, these subjects and these intricate artists in depth. And so it's very liberating, really.